What is NATO's agenda for the next generation? Welcome to the EPIA channel. This is the place where we aggregate European security news and try to keep it entertaining. Today I will be reading a report by the Center for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA. This report is titled An Agenda for NATO's Next Generation. The report is by Speranza. 7 decades since its founding, NATO remains the world's most successful alliance in modern history. Rising from the ashes of World War II, it has transitioned from Cold War deterrent to counterterrorism vehicle to bulwark against Russian advance. Weathering political storms and leadership changes, it has always survived based on the shared belief among its citizens that a world with NATO was safer than one without it. Today, a new generation of allied citizens is questioning that sentiment, putting the alliance's future at risk. Increasingly disconnected from the historical events that unmistakably validated NATO's importance, publics on both sides of the Atlantic have begun to doubt the value of the alliance. This phenomenon is striking among the millennials and Gen Zs, born between 1981 and 2012, who have never experienced World War II or even the Cold War, as they face a range of new threats that seem beyond NATO's purview, from disinformation and disruptive technologies to health crisis and climate change. They are either skeptical or unaware of NATO's enduring importance, at least in its current form. Being more globally minded and digitally connected to each other than ever before, the next generation arguably still cares about transatlantic cooperation, just on non-traditional military issues. As this next professional class begins to fill the ranks across governments and international institutions, NATO cannot afford to lose their buy-in. Instead, it must adapt to their vision for the future. NATO needs to become broader, more dynamic, and more global, not only to match the next generation's interests, but to prepare for the challenges to come. Otherwise, NATO and the international order it safeguards will not survive the next 7 decades. The report goes on with the heading Foundations for a Fresh Vision. The next generation of transatlantic leaders is largely comprised of millennials and Generation Z, born between 1997 and 2012. In the absence of collective experience of conflict, young Americans and Europeans have connected in other ways, through vibrant social media platforms, study abroad programs, and other cultural exchanges. They have grown up together in a globalized world, frequently traveling between the United States and Europe, which they still perceive as two of the closest international partners. While most enjoyed relative peace in their own countries, they have witnessed firsthand that modern threats, including the coronavirus pandemic, do not stay confined to national borders for long. Together, their generation has gone through a number of global challenges: international financial crises, the global war on terrorism, massive refugee and migrant flows, countless humanitarian crises, nuclear threats from North Korea, the effects of climate change, and the rapid proliferation of technology. These shared experiences have cultivated consensus that the international cooperation is critical to solving these challenges. These experiences have also shown the next generation that military force is not always the best foreign policy for such diverse global issues. This has made them more skeptical of the peace through strength philosophy that has traditionally underpinned NATO. Still, they do value diplomacy and multilateral institutions as tools for maintaining peace. Growing increasingly progressive on both sides of the Atlantic, the next generation is also more willing than their parents to cede powers to those institutions to achieve a greater benefit for the common good. So, what are the priorities for NATO's next generation? Firstly, the short-term priorities: prioritize human security and emphasize NATO's political role. NATO's traditional mission of collective security is not lost on the next generation. They want collective security, but in a much broader sense than military security. Many young Europeans and Americans have met young Ukrainians affected by Russian invasion. They have shared videos of young Belarusians being beaten in the streets of the capital while fighting for democracy. They have even joined photo challenges to support freedom of expression for young women in Turkey. Regardless of their country's membership in NATO, the next generation cares about security for all these people. They are passionate about ensuring their freedom. To appeal to that sentiment, NATO has emphasized the role it can play in defending all humans that share transatlantic values, not necessarily through military interventions, but through diplomatic, humanitarian, and political means. While critics may argue that human security is better addressed by humanitarian organizations such as the UN, the European Union, and other NGOs, NATO has an important part to play alongside them. Its current capacity building, civilian protection, and women, peace and security efforts crossed over in human security issues every single day, obligating the alliance to operate in this space. NATO has an equally important political role in human security issues as a platform for international dialogue and coordination, powerful public statements, and collective influence on the world stage, already undertaking a quote-unquote reflection process that seeks to explicitly enhance the alliance's political role. NATO should further prioritize human security across its strategy as well as activities. NATO needs to adapt for hybrid threats. Hybrid threats such as information operations, political subversion, economic coercion, and critical infrastructure attacks have become staple of the modern security environment. More than traditional military threats, millennials and Gen Zs have been inundated with talk of, quote, fake news, election interference, and energy as well as trade manipulation. This not only reflects the next generation's broad understanding of what security looks like, it represents a new reality to which NATO must adapt. Some argue that NATO should prioritize conventional threats, which it does best deterring to the European Union and nations to more appropriately respond to hybrid issues. Yet, as NATO has acknowledged, these hybrid threats from Russia, China, and their proxies are part of a deliberate campaign to undermine the transatlantic community. To avoid losing its competitive edge and defend against these ongoing hybrid attacks, NATO needs a more proactive and robust approach, which should be coordinated with the EU. NATO already has a mandate to do so based on its Article 3, which is resilience, which requires allies to maintain and develop their individual and collective capacity to resist armed attack. At the 2018 Brussels summit, Allied leaders also pledged to assist allies at any stage of a hybrid attack. To effectively support allies, NATO needs to broaden the aperture of its counter-hybrid efforts to include threats that are more political as well as economic in nature, but have security implications. NATO should develop a net assessment capability to understand the alliance's competitive advantages as well as vulnerabilities in the hybrid domain. To support this, NATO should conduct more campaign analysis and focus on the interaction of hybrid activities across domains. This will pave the way for the alliance to enhance situational awareness, forge a common comprehensive threat picture, and develop continuous hybrid response plans. Next-generation leaders can play a key role in helping NATO do that. For example, NATO should employ next-generation social media experts to track and potentially remove disinformation on its networks. NATO should acquire in-house network specialists to put nations' electrical grids back online during crisis and reduce vulnerabilities to future critical infrastructure disruptions. The alliance should enlist special analysts to constantly monitor flows of illicit finance, energy, weapons, and other data to detect hybrid campaigns targeting NATO nations.
We see cyber attacks almost every day. We see proliferation of nuclear weapons in North Korea, and then we see also more assertive Russia.
European countries will be well advised to recognise that the threats that they face are in the cyber domain, not just in the physical domain.
A lot of activity that makes us know that we need to be ready for any eventuality.
These steps would allow NATO, at the very least, to play a stronger role in gathering intelligence and facilitating broader transatlantic consultations to tackle hybrid threats. NATO should go on the cyber offensive. Cybersecurity is a significant interest for the next generation as it impacts so many aspects of their everyday lives. Some of their concerns include hacks, cyber espionage and theft, manipulation of devices across the Internet of Things, and reliability of networks. It is important for NATO to be more present on these issues. NATO has already taken some important steps, including helping to shape rules and norms in cyberspace, starting up a cyberspace operations center, and defending NATO's networks. To be a truly meaningful cyber player, however, NATO needs to recognize that it is facing continuous attacks and intrusions in cyberspace from Russia, China, and non-state actors. To compete in this environment, it needs a more active defense posture that can shock its adversaries and dissuade future attacks. The alliance must take the initiative in cyberspace, as opposed to reacting to the Kremlin's and the Chinese government's actions. Some allies remain skeptical of a more offensive cyber strategy for NATO as a defensive alliance. However, a number of allies have already agreed to provide offensive cyber effects in support of NATO's missions. Relying on those allies to implement the offensive actions, NATO could design and coordinate such strategy without going on the offensive itself. Drawing on the United States Cyber Command strategies of persistent engagement and defend forward, Allied leaders would work with the next generation cyber experts, coders, and white hackers to develop a similarly proactive cyber strategy for NATO. This could involve creating templates for national security, as well as employing active cyber defenses, using NATO as a planning hub for more proactive cyber maneuvers, and coordinating multinational cost-imposing measures against offenders. What would be NATO's medium-term priorities? To enhance NATO's crisis management capabilities. Looking to the future, experts predict that soft security issues, such as global health, climate change, and migration, will become more prominent than hard security issues like military invasions. While some leaders argue that the EU is better suited to tackle those soft issues, NATO already boosts crisis management as a core task. NATO has several useful mechanisms and competencies that should be better utilized in concert with the EU. As the threats continue growing, it is important for NATO to do more in this area, not only for the next generation, but for the future security. NATO should innovate and invest in defense technologies. Organizations all over the world are now looking to the next generation to innovate for tomorrow's challenges, and NATO should be no exception. To maintain its strategic edge over competitors like Russia and China, NATO needs to harness the innovative spirit of the next generation. NATO must articulate an overarching, emerging, and disruptive technologies framework with a clear agenda agreed by member states. In practical terms, this requires giving tech leaders appropriate authorities and resources to act. This should also involve hiring more rising tech and security experts, creating exchange programs with innovators in Silicon Valley, and bolstering NATO's public-private partnerships. Building a digital NATO. To get the tech-savvy, instant gratification craving next generation on board, NATO needs to go digital faster. Internally, NATO should develop a more advanced digital infrastructure. This would improve NATO's ability to gather and process information, as well as enhance key features and functions, such as command and control, planning and intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance. NATO should include transitioning to cloud technologies, creating a NATO-restricted common business network, and developing a secure app to facilitate internal processes and improve efficiency. What would NATO's long-term priorities be? Expanding partnerships. The globally minded next generation values international cooperation with a wide range of diverse stakeholders in the Euro-Atlantic area and beyond. NATO should draw on this sentiment to expand its partnerships for the future. Some may argue that adding more partnerships would be too burdensome and costly for allies already grappling with their own security challenges at home. Yet, as strategic competition intensifies in the future, reality will demand greater cooperation with non-member countries outside of NATO territory. In this environment, adopting a more strategic approach to partnerships is in the alliance's direct interest. These partnerships, which help NATO project stability beyond its borders and give non-member countries access to certain expertise and support, are far less costly than fighting major conflicts. NATO should come up with a new way to identify, to plan, to fund, and to incentivize partnerships across the globe. To help counter Russia in Europe, NATO should deepen its current limited ad hoc cooperation with Eastern partners, such as Moldova, Belarus, Serbia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. The next generation populations across these countries are more pro-European than their predecessors and represent new opportunities for collaboration with the alliance. To counter instability in the Middle East and North Africa, NATO should revive its Mediterranean Dialogue and Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, which has long been stuck in gridlock. To transcend the constraints of current political leaders in these formats, NATO should leverage its next-generation citizens' interests and people-to-people connections in the Middle East to unlock a new wave of cooperation. To counter China's rise, NATO should expand its engagements with the democratic partners in the Indo-Pacific, such as Australia, New Zealand, India, South Korea, Japan, and Mongolia. Many young Americans and Europeans have a growing interest in Asia, and it could bring new avenues for cooperation. Next generational leaders can help NATO to come up with creative ways to engage all these partners. From tech-focused exchanges to energy and environmental collaboration to virtual capacity building programs. So to sum up, to survive the next 70 years, NATO must do what it has always done: adapt. The alliance cannot risk losing the next generation of transatlantic leaders. To attract future leaders and to prepare for the security challenges of tomorrow, NATO must become more global and dynamic. To ensure its long-term success, the alliance needs a new agenda that sends a clear message to the next generation. The world needs NATO, and NATO needs them. The agenda outlined above gives NATO a framework to convey that message. These strategic priorities offer the alliance a graduated plan to begin integrating next-generation priorities without abandoning key efforts that keep current policymakers outside. As NATO looks to 2030, it must increasingly look to those who are under 30. They will be the ones responsible for preserving transatlantic cooperation for decades to come. If you'd like to stay updated with security news in Europe, be sure to follow me on Twitter. Also, we have an Instagram account. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you did find it informative. Subscribe to this channel if you have not yet and give this video a like. It'll help me a lot. Thanks again and take care.